So, Dermot, great to be with you, sir. Can you just, for those who haven't heard your name or are not sure, can you just tell us a little bit about your story and what you do?
Depends what you want to know. My name is Dermot Kearney. I'm a doctor. I'm a cardiologist working in the northeast of England. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from here. I'm Irish. I did most of my basic training in Ireland, my initial medical and cardiology specialist training. Then most Irish doctors are expected to get some international experience, so I went to the Netherlands to do some additional cardiology training, and then with the intention of coming back to Ireland initially, but there were very few cardiology posts available at that time. This was in the early 2000s. But then a post came up in the northeast of England, and a friend of mine was already working here, so I trained with them. So I came over to see what was going on, and we came here and settled here and stayed here. 1 year became 2 years, became 5 years, became 21 years now at this stage. So I've been 21 years in the northeast of England. And probably the reason I think I'm on this show is because I've become a little bit known for some activity I've been doing over the last few years. Is it about the abortion pill reversal treatment you want to talk
Yes,
about?
sir.
And so most people I think will know at this stage, first of all, abortion is very common in the United Kingdom. And 90% of all abortions nowadays in recent years are carried out by chemical means. Some surgical abortions are still carried out, but the vast majority are done by giving drugs. And it's a two-stage process. The first drug is called mifepristone, which is it binds to receptors that block the action of progesterone. So it's a progesterone receptor antagonist or progesterone receptor blocker. Progesterone is the natural hormone produced by the mother that's essential to maintain pregnancy. That's why it's called progesterone, because it actually literally means pro-gestation steroid hormone. That's the abbreviation is progesterone. So without progesterone, and some women, unfortunately, who suffer early miscarriages early in pregnancy do so because of low levels of progesterone and not producing enough progesterone. And similarly, even though progesterone levels might be sufficient, if something blocks the action, prevents it having its natural effect by binding to receptors, that sets off chemical reactions to preserve the pregnancy, and miscarriage can happen. So that's what these drugs, mifepristone, is designed to do. It prevents the action of progesterone and causes miscarriage and causes abortion. She's then instructed by the abortion providers to take a second drug, usually either the next day or 2 days later. It's called misoprostol. That's a prostaglandin analog. That's a powerful drug that causes powerful contractions of the uterus, so expels the baby who is usually deceased at this stage and any other products of conception. So if a mother takes both of those abortion pills, there's a 98 to 99% chance that her baby will not survive. The baby will die, usually within the first few days. But occasionally babies do survive, and there are some children running around today who did survive their mothers taking both, but they're few and far between, so less than 2%. If she takes the first drug, the mifepristone, but doesn't for some reason take the second drug, misoprostol, there's about an 80% chance the baby will die. So about 20% or slightly less than 20%, depends on the stage of gestation. And most of these drugs are taken within the first 10 weeks. So there's at least an 80% chance that the baby will not survive if she takes the first drug but doesn't take the second drug. So this is where we come in. So it has been noticed that because mifepristone, the first drug, blocks the action of progesterone, it has been found that if at that stage the mother changes her mind, she's taken the first pill already, but she decides not to take the second pill, and she hears about progesterone, we can, in more often than not, save her baby. So we can reduce the certain mortality rate from 80% down to less than 50%. So our survival rate in the UK is just a little bit over 50%, about 55%. In the United States, the survival rate is in general is about 65%. The difference, there's two main reasons I think for that. The first is that there's a greater awareness in America. In fact, I think about 13 or 14 states, it's mandatory that if a mother is undergoing a chemical abortion, she must be informed that if she changes her mind, she has recourse to progesterone rescue treatment, and they have to inform about that. So there's a greater awareness of it. And for example, our median time, our average time for a woman from taking the first pill to actually starting the progesterone rescue treatment is about 25 hours. Whereas in the United States, it's less than 12 hours in most places, and between 6 and 12 hours. Well, the rescue treatment can be effective up to 72 hours. The quicker it's given, the better. The second reason I think that why there's a discrepancy in the survival rates is that in many places in America, there's over 1,200 or 1,500 doctors providing this rescue treatment in almost every state, and not 1,500 in every state, but in the total, and almost every state has some doctors providing it. So there's a great awareness and there's a great availability of doctors. So in many cases, a mother just has to ring up or call up, phone in, or turn up at a crisis pregnancy centre. She'll get seen by a doctor who can do an ultrasound immediately, see is the baby still alive, and if the baby's still alive, then it's worthwhile going ahead with the progesterone. Well, we don't have that luxury here. There's only a very small number of us in the UK. I won't say how many or who they are, but there's a small number, including myself, providing this service. So we can't get ultrasounds done immediately. We have to just start treatment in the hope that the baby is still survive. But we know that in some cases the baby it's probably too late. The baby's already miscarriage has already started to occur. But we don't know that, and it's always worthwhile giving the treatment because we know it's safe and it can be effective. So we basically, in this country, we've managed to increase the survival rate from 20% to more than 50%. So that's more than doubling. So, and the other way to look at it is, and this I think is the incredible statistic, that we have reduced a certain mortality rate from 80% plus to less than 50% to 45%. And that's remarkable. There are very, very few interventions in medicine where there's a condition where there's a guaranteed mortality of 80% being reduced by down to less than 50%, so 35, maybe 40% reduction. The only thing I can think of is in my own spheres of defibrillation. If someone has a cardiac arrest and a defibrillator, an AED, is brought to them quickly and they get a shock, it might save them. But even then, a large number of those who initially are resuscitated will not survive because of whatever underlying condition caused the cardiac arrest. But that is a life-saving procedure in many cases, and the whole world is in awe of defibrillation, and we want to get defibrillators in golf courses and pubs and post offices and all around every place, every public place, and yet nobody is sort of shouting from the mountains and the hilltops and tall buildings about this wonderful rescue treatment that has a remarkable success rate to take away a certain mortality of 80% to less than 50% by a very simple, safe, cheap treatment. So that's what we're providing. So in the program, the rescue program using abortion pill reversal, using simple progesterone, was established. The program was established in the US in 2012. The first cases had been done a few years before that, almost by accident, when individual women contacted doctors who knew someone who might be able to help. And there were just some small anecdotal cases, but then they realized that there was a few different doctors around the country doing this between 2006, 2007. So they formed an alliance and set up an actual service, a nationwide service in 2012, which has been running since then. And more than 5,500, almost 6,000 babies have been born by this stage. So over the last 12 years, to mothers who had taken that initial first abortion pill, changed their mind, and managed to get prompt progesterone treatment. In this country, we've got, I'm aware of 63 babies that have been born, but we've only been doing it since 2020. Our very first case was 2020. Took off slowly. Then I'm sure we'll come to this in a moment, but we were banned from doing it, myself and another doctor. We were the only two at the time. We were banned from doing it for the best part of a year, from the end of April 2021 until the end of February 2022. When complaints were made by the abortion providers that we were basically interfering with their service, with their service provision, and they didn't like what we were doing, so they put in false allegations against us that we were pressurizing women, that we were enforcing our Christian beliefs, forcing our pro-life beliefs on these vulnerable women, that we weren't keeping proper records, that this was illegal, unethical activity. But there was no evidence to support any of the allegations, but we still had to be investigated by the General Medical Council, who, after an investigation and consulting with expert witnesses who certainly didn't have any conflict of interest and weren't necessarily pro-life or Christian in any way. They got opinions from a number of expert witnesses, and then from the women themselves who were being helped. And they came to the conclusion following the investigation that there was no prospect. That's the word they used. The phrase they used was there was no prospect of finding any evidence to support the allegations that had been made. But in that meantime, in that 10-month period, lots of lives that could have been saved. We couldn't provide the life-saving treatment for them, which was very frustrating and disappointing as well. But we're back in business again. We have the service up and running. A small number of us, and we can be contacted by a number of ways. We're available through most of the mainstream pro-life organizations have our contact details. And also there's an international helpline, which is American-based. It goes back to that 2012 initial service setup. So myself and some of the doctors are affiliated or registered with that service. So if they get a call from the UK, from a mother at any time of the day or night, it's a 24-hour service, 7 days a week. They say, oh yes, we have somebody in the UK who might be able to help. I'll put you in contact with him or her. So that's how most of the mothers actually come to us, is through this international helpline. But some of them through groups like Christian Concern, Good Counsel, the Society for Protection of Unborn Children. We've had a number of calls. In fact, I've had a few personal ones where at one I got one of the more recent ones was where a baby has been born. I got it last December, a Saturday afternoon. I got a phone call from a strange number I didn't recognize. It was a temptation not to answer it, but luckily I did. It was from a young woman who heard about me from another family who had availed of the service 2 years before that, and their little baby boy was doing fine. And she knew this family, and she contacted them and asked, is there any way they could give her my contact details, and they did, which I was glad they did. And one of the other girls, a girl in the Midlands who's been very vocal about this, called Amrita, she was contacted on Facebook by another mother who lived in her vicinity and asked was there any way she could put me in contact with or put this girl in contact with me because she wanted to save her baby. So sometimes it comes through by word of mouth, by other people hearing of the good experience of other mothers. The majority still come through the various helplines.
Wow.
So I'll let you take over from here if that's okay.
No, I'm just blown away, to be honest, Dermot. So I think you come on my radar during that time with Christian Concern, supporting your case around 2020, around then.
A wonderful organisation. Because I have to admit, when the allegations came against myself and Dr. Eileen Riley, we were the two doctors. Eileen's an obstetrician in Glasgow. I'm a cardiologist in the northeast of England. But I've trained in this area of medicine. It's not rocket science, to be honest with you, but it's an area where you do have to have a little bit of knowledge to make sure what you're doing is safe. And I had researched it for 6 years before I actually became involved. So I first heard about it in 2014. I was a little bit skeptical, I have to admit. I didn't know much about it. I was concerned that even if the baby survived, would there be any sort of long-term congenital problems for the child? And that was a reasonable concern, because we were thinking of situations such as thalidomide, which had seemed to be a great drug for morning sickness in the early 60s, but then when the babies were born, once they were exposed to that drug, they had significant congenital problems. And we were concerned that if the babies did survive, and we didn't believe that they would, because there wasn't much information in 2014, there was some small numbers of small case series and anecdotal cases from the US. But we thought if they did survive, how safe is it for the child? We presumed it would be safe for the mother, because progesterone has been used successfully in pregnancy for more than 50 years. So it's commonly used to prevent miscarriage in women, particularly if they've had previous miscarriages. It's used routinely in IVF. So we know that progesterone is safe. And we actually use lower doses than are used in those situations, or at least for shorter periods of time. But we weren't sure what would be the outcome for the child, having been exposed to mifepristone. But even the abortion providers themselves were able to provide enough information, as they had studied the small numbers of children who had survived despite being exposed to the abortion drugs, that if they survived just the mifepristone alone, that there wasn't any increased risk of any congenital problems. And that has been proven to be the case with as I mentioned, more than 5,500 babies have been born, and there is not any increased risk of any congenital problems. So once we got over that, then I was happy to to try and get involved in the service. But it took me a few years. So when the call came through for myself and Dr. Riley that we had to stop providing the service, it was frustrating because we knew that we already had many successes. A number of babies had been born. There were plenty more women who were pregnant and ongoing pregnancies. I was getting personally up to between 5 and 6 calls a week, and not all of those were women who were prepared to go on and start the treatment. Some of them just wanted to discuss it and decided for whatever reason, usually related to some form of coercion or pressure, that while they would like to save the child, that they felt they had no option but to go ahead with the abortion. For roughly 60% of the ladies who contacted myself went ahead or at least started treatment. Some of them disappeared off the radar. They were on treatment. They were doing fine. They had a scan. Everything was going fine. And then they stopped responding to my messages or they stopped calling me. So I don't go chasing people. If there must be a reason why they don't want to continue conversations in those situations. And it may well be that some of them actually had their babies. So that's why I'm not sure exactly how many, because some of them just might want to have this as just a terrible event in their lives that they want to put behind them. They've had their babies and they don't want to continue to be reminded of it, for example. Others may have suffered miscarriage. Others may have gone ahead with abortions. So some of them we lost contact, but they were relatively small numbers. Of those who did survive, I'm aware of the total numbers between those of us who were providing the service, 63. I'm personally responsible for 30 of the women that I helped have had babies. And there's another 2 due to be born in the coming weeks. So that'll bring us up to 65. And then presumably there'll be more along the way then shortly after that.
Wow. It's
Oh yeah, I was going to
ask
mention when you mentioned about Christian concern, what I really wanted to mention that when the allegations came through, we received an email on the Wednesday afternoon, myself and Eileen, almost simultaneously, and we had to inform a number of the pro-life organisations that, because they were referring mothers to us. I said, please, we're being under investigation. You'll have to stop sending women to us for the moment. We didn't know what the outcome was going to be, so we had to inform groups like Christian Concern. And by Friday morning, Andrea Williams, the chief executive of Christian Concern, had organised a Zoom meeting, because this was during the COVID times, a Zoom meeting with myself and Dr. Riley, herself and 2 of her leading barristers from the Christian Legal Centre. And they already were determined that they were going to fight this, because myself and Eileen's reaction was, well, it's the GMC, there's nothing you can do, we're under investigation, we'll have to, this is the end of the road, basically. But Andrea, I remember very well, because she pointed at the camera on the Zoom, and she said, no, this is unjust, this is not right, we are going to fight this, and we will win this. It's David versus Goliath, but David beat Goliath, so we can do the same. And I thought, well, okay, if you think, then I'll go along with you. And they had a wonderful strategy. So our legal team were very, very clever. They knew they needed to get honest, but strong statements from the mothers themselves, because one of the main allegations was that we were pressurizing these women. We were putting them under pressure to follow our pro-life beliefs or Catholic beliefs, that we weren't being honest with them, and we knew that they knew that wasn't true. So we were determined that we would get statements from the mothers who actually had availed of the service, and I wasn't allowed to have any involvement with that because it came through the legal channels. So I just had to ask the girls, is it okay if I pass your contact details to our legal team? And we could have got 40 statements by that stage if we wanted, but they settled for 10, but they got very wide range of different cases. So they got women who had had their babies, women who were still pregnant and waiting to have their babies. They got some from women who had tried the treatment where it hadn't worked. So remember, 45 to 50% treatment doesn't work. But they were so grateful that somebody tried to help them. Even got 2 statements from 2 of the girls who discussed it with myself, but decided for their personal reasons that they were going to go ahead with the abortion. And they got very supportive statements from all of those women. I was actually in tears when I read them, because initially I wasn't allowed to see the statements until it came to sort of the tribunal and the hearings that we had to have. And it was very touching to see the level of gratitude that all of the women expressed. But Christian Concern were wonderful. They put together a very strong case. And even when the medical tribunal decided, oh, these are serious allegations, we have to investigate this, so they put conditions attached to our practice. The GMC actually wanted to ban us completely from practicing medicine, which would have had serious consequences for our livelihoods and jobs, and also for the services that we provide in our everyday work. The tribunal thought that was a bit extreme, especially during COVID times when there was a great need for trying to get extra doctors and healthcare professionals involved. So they said, well, let them continue their normal practice because there's no hint of any malpractice or professional misconduct in their normal day-to-day work. But let's just stop them from doing this. So in my case, they attached a number of conditions, the main one being that I was not allowed to prescribe, administer, or recommend progesterone for abortion pill reversal until this had been investigated. And that was meant to go on for 18 months, to be reviewed every 6 months. One of the early reviews, we had provided all this evidence, and the chairperson of the review panel said, well, we're not going to look at any of the evidence. We're just going to look at the allegations. And my lawyers were enraged. They threw up their arms in exasperation and said, this is basically a kangaroo court, but the sentence and the decision is determined in advance before any hearing even took place. So they decided they were going to take it out of the sphere of the medical tribunal altogether. So we appealed to the High Court, and that's how we ended up winning our case. So we appealed to the High Court on the basis that the conditions imposed and the decisions made were unjust and unnecessary because they were not backed by any evidence whatsoever, whereas we had plenty of evidence to the contrary that none of the allegations were true. So we took the case to the High Court, and 6 days before the scheduled High Court appearance, which was meant to be in February 2022, at the end of February 2022, 6 days beforehand, we got I got a phone call from my Christian Legal Centre barrister to say, have you heard the good news? They've dropped the case. They've decided that there's no evidence to support the allegations. And then about half an hour later, I received an email from the GMC confirming that the case investigators had looked at all of the evidence. They found that there was no evidence to support, and they agreed that the evidence was all in our favour. The evidence that was produced was all in our favour, and that none of the women had said any of the allegations were true. And even the expert witnesses who actually, there was one on our side, one on the GMC side, both of them more or less concurred that there was a reasonable evidence base for the service we were providing, that there was no dangers involved, and that and both of those people, neither of them were Christians, neither of them were Catholics, neither of them, both of them actually do abortions. So they weren't sort of in favour of sort of pro-life arguments, but they just looked at the evidence and said, there's nothing wrong with this. These two doctors, myself and Dr. Riley. Well, in my case, initially, it was interesting that Dr. Riley's case, the case against her wasn't dropped until 2 months later, because she wasn't defended by Christian Concern. She decided for some reason to go with a secular defence organisation who basically advised her, don't challenge this, just accept what you've got. We'll try and achieve damage limitation. We know you're guilty, but don't make it any worse. Keep your head down. And so she got the opposite advice to what Christian Concern were doing. So they didn't take the challenge, the allegations of the judgment to the High Court. So there was no pressure on the GMC or the medical tribunal to drop the charges against her. So it was only 2 months after the charges against me were dropped that hers were eventually dropped, because they had to. We were doing exactly the same thing. In fact, if anything, she was even more entitled to do it, because one of the allegations against me was that a cardiologist shouldn't be doing this. But I was able to show that I'm not just a cardiologist, that I have general medical training. I do general medical work. In fact, the abortion reversal service is not really obstetrics. It's more endocrinology. It's hormonal treatment that we give for hormonal situation. And I provide steroid hormones for many indications in my normal everyday work. So that charge was dropped very quickly.
Blessed are the persecuted, Dermot, in many ways. In terms of hearing about those lives you saved.
Yes. Yeah, you could say that.
But in terms of, you talked about the battle in the States being a lot more at the forefront, and there's it's a much bigger kind of battle. Over on this side of the water, it's obviously, you said there's only a few of you doing it. How does the average
Yeah.
churchman or churchwoman change that? How do we move? Because Western Europe is almost, it's pro-choice or pro-abortion in every way compared to the States. How does the sea tide change over here?
It's difficult because we have to win over hearts and minds, and I think the problem, if you go back to the 60s, 1967, when the Abortion Act was passed, the majority of people in the country at that stage agreed abortion was a terrible thing and it really should only be. The only reason it was brought in was because they were getting reports which were falsified and greatly exaggerated. We now know that all these women were dying from backstreet abortions. We know that was not the case. There were small numbers, but it certainly wasn't the hundreds of thousands that the population was led to believe. So most people believed abortion is terrible. The human life begins at conception. Killing a baby is terrible, but on the other hand, we have to have compassion for women in these terrible situations. We can't let women die. So that's how abortion was introduced, on the back of that. Unfortunately, we now know that they were exaggerated stories. However, it has become ingrained. So if you look at the numbers of abortions that were carried out in the late 60s, early 70s, you're talking about a few hundred became a few thousand. Now we're up to 250, 260,000. How did we get to that stage? Now, with the chemical abortions and with the pills by post and much easier availability, that has certainly had an influencing factor on the numbers. But nobody nowadays is trying to say, oh, we're only providing abortions for these very hard cases because women are going to die if we don't have it. It's just become an accepted part of the NHS, accepted part of what they call healthcare. We have to counteract that. We have to show that, well, number one, I in my opinion, and this is what I try to do on social media on a regular basis, we have to, number one, show that, remind people, because the people know or they may have forgotten, but remind people that your life began at conception. Every human life begins at conception. Your life didn't begin at birth. Your life didn't begin with a heartbeat. Your life didn't begin when you became aware of your surroundings around you. Your life began at conception. So we have to get that across the science, basically, even putting religion and faith and other belief or values to one side, just from the scientific point of view. A human life begins at the moment of conception. Next, we have to show that every human life is of equal value. So my life is of the same value as yours. I'm not more valuable, or nobody else is any valuable than anybody else. So we all have equal value, regardless of our age, our size, our abilities, our lack of abilities, our race, our religion, our sexual orientation, that none of these are ability to do certain things. None of these determine our value. They're all important in their own right, all these characteristics, but to choose, because if you try to say that a life only becomes valuable because at a certain age or a certain size, you're making really an arbitrary decision. You're trying to decide, and somebody else might come up with a different set of values. So the only safe way is to accept that all human lives have equal value from the very beginning. So it's inherent, the very fact of being human, because we know from recent history that for some people, Black lives were of less value. Black people were less valued than white people. Jewish people were less valued than non-Jewish people. Slavic people, gypsies. So whatever a government or a society determined that some lives were of less value than others, is a very dangerous road to go down. So we have to try and get across that while all of these characteristics are important in their own right, they do not determine their value, that all human lives are of equal value. So there, I think the two basic things we got to start with, that number one, life begins at conception, and all human lives have equal inherent value. We got to constantly get that message across. Now we got to do that. The way I look on it is that the whole abortion industry is based on three things. Number one, it's based on lies, so deceit and lies. So we have to tell the truth, and the scientific truth. So we have to and constantly tell the truth, no matter how many people are prepared to believe it or acknowledge it. We have to always be truthful. Number two, the second thing that the abortion industry is built on is instilling fear. So instilling fear, for example, our case was probably a very good example. So they told lies about us. They made these false allegations, which is accepted now by the GMC, that none of the allegations had any support behind them, any evidence to support them. They presumed that we would be fearful. So, and then, we probably should have been, because our livelihoods were at stake. And so they tried to create fear. And also then they tried to instill fear that what these two doctors were doing was dangerous. So built on the lies that this was dangerous. So instilling fear. They tell women all the time, oh, you can't continue with the pregnancy, or you're too young, or you'll destroy your life, or your family will throw you out, or your boyfriend will throw you out, or you can't continue your education, you're going to suffer. So they have this way of instilling fear. So we have to counteract that with courage. So number one, we have to be truthful, we have to be courageous. And number three, we have to do so in a spirit of love. Because again, knowing where the abortion ideology comes from, it's based on hatred of beauty and justice and truth and righteousness. Whereas our motivation has to be love. We have to be patient, because we know that people will find it difficult sometimes to understand our position and where we're coming from. But we have to be just persevere constantly with a loving attitude, explaining the truth and getting across and courageously as well. We found, the thing I learned most probably from our experience, is that when you stand up to these people, they will, first of all, they will be astonished. So Goliath is astonished that David stands up to him. PPAS and MSI and the RCOG, the people who don't like what we're doing, I think were genuinely astonished that somebody was prepared to take them on and not give in to their demand, because it looked like an easy victory for them. They were just going to make a complaint. The GMC, some people, I'm afraid to say, in the GMC were possibly on their side, because there was we saw the correspondence, lots of first name terms and so on. Whereas in my case, it was all Mr. and Mrs. So they have friends in high places, these organizations. So they presumed that it would be an easy victory for them. So when you stand up to these giants, you can be surprised. They will cower back, because we have truth on our side, and if we're courageous enough, you'd be surprised at what we can win. So I think we have to just persevere. Now, it's interesting, I don't know whether you've attended the March for Life in this country, but that started 10 years ago. The very first March for Life in this country started in Birmingham. There was a couple of hundred people on it. And then the next year there was another, maybe an extra 200 or 300. And then it got too big for, I got some noise in the office, I don't know. It got too big for Birmingham, so I had to do it in London. And the first couple of years in London, it was maybe 2,000 or 3,000. This year there was almost 10,000. So year by year we're growing. And there's wonderful people like Isabel and her team, Ben and Sarah, the three main people organising the March for Life. So there is a growing awareness of it, and there is a growing support, I think. And you've got wonderful groups, and I mentioned some of like Christian Concern and SPUC and Good Counsel, and there are so many other wonderful pro-life organisations, some of them small, some of them large, doing similar work and inspiring people. So I think it is a growing phenomenon, the pro-life movement in this country. I'm particularly impressed. There's a young group in London. I don't think they've managed to get a branch in Liverpool yet, but called Abortion Resistance. What I like about them is they're young, they're vibrant, they're well educated, they're highly articulate, they're all beautiful, gorgeous people, and they have limited their membership from 18 to 35-year-olds. So if you're over 35, sorry, they'll accept our financial support and other things, but they make their own decisions, and I like that. I think that's great. And they have got these little campaigns. They're out on the streets on a weekly basis during the year, mostly in the London area. But they're going to, one by one, they're going to influence hearts and minds, particularly of young people. And so there's lots of these little initiatives springing up all over the UK. So I think there's hope for us all.
Oh man, that is wonderful just to hear what you've just I was going to ask you about 4 questions, but you've answered them all in what you said there in many ways. How can we pray for you, just in your work?
Well, pray for the girls. Pray for a greater awareness, because that's our main. That's the main stumbling block, because we know there's a lot of lies out there. We know that if, for example, back I mentioned in 2020, the end of 2020, 2021, I was getting 5 or 6 calls a week, sometimes the weekends, especially maybe 3 calls in one day. Now we're down to just a small number per month. And we know that it's difficult, because we know that now if a mother who wants to avail of the service, if she changes her mind, if she types in abortion pill reversal, she'll get the negative websites. She'll get Planned Parenthood, BPAS, MSI, or COG, whereas you have to put in abortionpillreversal.com. That'll take her straight to the proper website, if you like. And we know from the girls who do contact us, we know that they're actively told by the abortion providers not to contact us, because in almost every case, when the mother, she's taken the first pill, she changes her mind, her natural reaction in most cases is to go back to whoever gave her the pill. So MSI, BPAS, whoever, she will phone them or contact them, and she'll say, I've changed my mind, I want to save my baby, what can I do? And they're not going to tell her the truth. They're not going to say, oh, there's a progesterone treatment, if you try that. They're told actively, well, there's not a lot you can do, you have to take the second pill. Or some of them are told, well, just don't take the second pill and wait and see what happens. But whatever you do, they're actually being told, do not seek out progesterone. So they're being told lies, because they're being told it's dangerous. So again, lies and instilling fear in people. Unfortunately, I had one young girl a few days ago who was really keen to save her baby, but she was just so scared, and she left it too late. By the time she eventually decided to get the progesterone, but at that stage the miscarriage was already underway. So because she was so scared of what she'd been told. So we have to create a greater awareness. We need to make people know that this is safe, that it's available. There are doctors willing and able to provide this for them. It's legal. It's not unethical, because all these lies are being portrayed about us. And it's free. Well, we don't charge anything. Okay, the girls have to pay for the medications, but the medications are not expensive. It's about £20 for 2 weeks. And in some cases, 2 weeks is all they need. If they're very early stage, we might have to give them an extra few weeks to get them. We like to get them to about 12 or 13 weeks. So we need to create a greater awareness. So if we're going to pray that this service will become more widely known and more widely accepted, and that more doctors and other healthcare professionals will be happy to provide it. We would love it to become mainstream sort of NHS healthcare provision. We know that's not going to happen immediately, but if enough doctors become aware of it and are prepared to take part in the service, and once they see for themselves, like I was skeptical initially, but once I saw it in action, I became more and more convinced of the safety of it and the efficacy. We'd love it to be 100% successful, but we know that at best we will achieve might be 65% or so, which a lot of babies will be saved. And even the cases where we don't achieve a success, the mothers are so grateful, and we're able to truthfully tell them, you did everything you could. You made a bad decision. We all make bad decisions. You did the wrong thing. We all do the wrong thing from time to time. But you did your best to try and correct it. There was nothing more you could have done. And just for mothers to hear that encouragement is, can be maybe life-saving in some cases, or at least save them from years of remorse and depression and regret. And then if there is large elements of regret and remorse, we have other services that we can put them in contact with that to help them in those areas too.
Dermot, I just want to say God bless you, sir. Thank you so much for your work. And yeah, in any way,
myself and Dr. Riley, when we used, because I have to say it's really sad when a woman loses her baby. So they've tried so hard, they've started treatment. I know 5 or 6, 7 days later they have this heavy hemorrhage and a miscarriage, and it's really sad. But they're so grateful that they tried. But when that happens, it can be despondent for myself personally, and there's a temptation maybe we shouldn't because it is emotionally draining. But myself and Eileen, we discussed this many times, Dr. Riley, and she encouraged me. She said, even if you save one life, it's worth it. I know we've got 65 at least, maybe more, and hopefully many more to come. Now, I would love to see the end of. I wish that the service we provided wasn't necessary. I would love to see abortion pills banned completely, but we know that that's unlikely to happen in the foreseeable future. Maybe eventually it might, when people realise the dangers of them, because they do cause. Women have died from the abortion pills. Women have suffered serious hemorrhages. Women have suffered serious infections from the pills that they take. We know progesterone is safe, but I would prefer if we didn't have to provide the service. But it's a service that the only reason we provide it is women need it. That they came looking for it. We didn't go out looking for them. They came looking for us. They changed their mind. They desperately wanted help. So even if one life is saved, it's worth it. But we know that many more than one life is being saved.
Wonderful. Praise God. And how can we support you? Is there any way to support you online in any way, or where can we follow you?
Just to spread the word, make people aware of it. The 2 points that people need to know, well, 3 points. Number one, it's available in the UK. Number two, it's often, not always, but often, more often than not effective. So I tell people 50 to 55% of the chance, and that's the truth. And that it's safe, that people need to be made aware that this is safe. There's no danger whatsoever. It's like one commonly used phrase in the States, there's teachers with that the Abortion Pill Reversal Network have these great t-shirts with, it's just progesterone. That like, it's a simple hormone. It's used to prevent miscarriage. It's used in IVF. And this is the ideal, because what we're doing basically is to prevent miscarriage. And this is the ideal situation, because progesterone doesn't always work to prevent miscarriage, because some miscarriages can be due to congenital reasons or nothing to do with progesterone levels. But if it's due to a low progesterone level, then progesterone is the ideal treatment. And this is the equivalent of that. So we're basically mimicking that situation. So a woman with low progesterone levels, the only difference is the levels are not low, but the effect has been blocked by this other poisonous treatment that the abortion people give. So we're trying to level the playing field, basically, to allow more progesterone molecules to get in there to bind to these precious receptors that need progesterone binding to them. So if you can knock out the mifepristone, which you can do in more than 50% of cases. So try and spread the word that this is available, it's often effective, and it's the only option that we have available at the moment, and it's safe for both mother and child.
Thank you, Dermot. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your bravery. And let's fight Goliath. That's all we can do. Bless you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless you.